Do you want to be on the video? Or? Pardon me. Do you want to be on the video?
That's my wife's forehead. I'm scared.
Just let him know.
If that's your wife's forehead, you should be scared.
Yeah, exactly. Let's see. Bear with me. I apologize. My tablet computer completely failed a couple days ago, so it's
Maybe I should be.
we're trying to recover anything off of it at our corporate headquarters, but
I have to wear a mask. We're 6
I'm
feet
using
apart.
strictly my phone, so I'm not real familiar with it right now.
But we can see you and hear you.
My condolences.
Now we see
the high school picture again.
Yes. See, much better.
Hey, Carl.
Hey, Carl, how are you?
Good, how are you?
Good.
Hi, Bud.
Hey, Carl. Hi, Jill.
Hi there.
Hi, Dan. And
Paige.
Paige.
I couldn't see this last time, but is that a severed arm wrapped around Lucas's neck?
It looks it, doesn't it?
Yeah.
It is. Yeah, that's 7. That's well, I'd say my oldest when she was about 10. Or actually 9. 8 or 9. Wow.
Oh, I can see her. I can see a little bit of her hair on the left side.
Yeah, I know. I was trying to
You wrapped her out.
Yeah, obviously I'm not a Photoshop expert, or I would have removed that. But hey,
I'm here. I'm sorry. I'm like a little late running in. I'm trying to pull up the agenda.
Yeah, Bill Shapiro's here too.
The agenda's pretty
Hi, Bill.
straightforward, Jill, just let Glenn talk.
Yeah, it's
Okay,
it's
so
it's
I don't need the agenda.
it's only one item. It's just the
Zoning
zoning
related
regs. That's it.
Okay, so let's start this meeting at 5:33, November 16th, a special meeting for the Summer Zoning Commission to discuss zoning regulations with Glenn Chalder from Planometrics. And I see we have our selectman Bud Knorr here. We have Carl Landolina, town attorney, and I think all commission members, Carl Walton, Lucas Cherry, Dan Ferrero, Paige Rassett, myself, Jill Conklin, Jennifer, our staff liaison, zoning enforcement officer, and I guess we're good.
Bill Shapiro.
Bill Shapiro's
Bill
here
Shapiro.
somewhere.
Bill Shapiro?
Yep.
Oh, he's on the phone. You're on the phone. I see it. Okay. Good. All right. So I guess I'm going to turn it over to you, Glenn. Is that the...
I think I can get us started, certainly. Well, first of all, hi, everybody. It's been quite a while since we were together last. So I was asked to bring the regulations up to speed in terms of starting the dialogue again and moving ahead with the regulations. The first thing I wanted to talk with you about tonight is I did put together a booklet with just summary of changes that I've made in this document, which will at least set the stage for moving ahead. And then we can talk about specific sections of the regulations. Does that make sense?
Yes.
So the first thing is the commission adopted, I think it was back in April, the detached housing development zone, and I inserted that as adopted by the commission as a new section 5.3. I think just made a couple of numbering and cross-referencing changes within the regulation so that it fit in where it should. And so that's now in section 5.3. Not aware of any other changes the commission has made in the regulation since January, and if there are, just please let me know. I think as talked with Carl Landolina in terms of religious institutions, the text had said in the prior version we went to public hearing on, it had said place of worship open to the public, and it's my understanding from the discussions the commission has been having over the past 10 or 11 months or so, that suggestion is to change that text to read place of worship or religious institution, which is the language as it currently exists in your regulations at the moment. I made some significant changes to the earthwork regulations based again on issues, as I understand the commission has been grappling with over the last 9 or 10 months, particularly with the issue about where is the point where the commission actually takes regulatory authority over an earthwork activity. The regulations have been set up before as excavation and filling, but there can be significant impact on adjacent property just from moving earth around them. And so at what point in time does it become not just excavation, not just filling, but a separate type of activity? So at this point in time, the regulation has been set up. We can talk through the details that any earthwork activity which exceeds 1,000 cubic yards would need to come to the commission for a special permit for erosion sediment control and other types of aspects. So the changes in here, I've described them in more detail in this material, and we can talk about that when we get to the specific section. I'm now back to page 3 of this booklet, or this memo which I put together, the summary of the changes made so far. And into the farm winery section, you may recall that in our public informational meeting last year and at the public hearing in January, we had quite a number of comments with regard to farm winery and farm brewery. It's provided with some text information that suggested a possible way to approach this. And so I replaced section 612 in the regulations from December of last year with this text and changed the references and listing of permitted uses and put it all together into a package, I think, for the Commission's review and approval. I think I broke up separate activities to be authorized. Part of the special use permits of the Commission is cleared that it might be approving manufacturing and production, it may be approving retail sales, it may be approving a tasting room with public events, it may be approving function rooms at private events, but those would need to be declared and discussed as part of the special permit. In addition then, I went back through my notes. I'm on to page 4 of that, again, summary of changes made. This page is now titled Summary of Possible Issues Remaining. I went back through my notes from the public informational meeting of last year and from the public hearing, and there were some issues that came up that at some point in time we probably need to talk about. One of which was the comment was raised at the public hearing about the definition in noise-related terms of daytime hours, because those hours perhaps might be more extensive than the Commission might be comfortable with, and if so, this would be the time to change that. The second issue that came up was in the report from the Planning Commission. The Planning Commission requested the removal of earth products be prohibited in the A zone, which is, I believe, the way it's currently configured in the regulations today. And the interesting thing about this is this earth removal is a use which can be allowed or not allowed in a zoning district, but there are times that earth removal has to take place on an application because you have to dig an excavation or put a driveway in or do some other things. So the regulations had been set up to approach this as an activity, particularly a temporary activity. People don't keep digging until they get to the center of the earth, for example. There are limits to it. It's a temporary activity. The temporary may be a long time, but it's not a permanent use or activity in many situations. But the unique thing in Connecticut law is that a zoning regulation referred to the Planning Commission, which comes back with a negative comment or negative referral. The Commission has put into the situation now of requiring a 2/3 vote to override their recommendation or accepting it. And we should talk about this particular one because it could fall into that category. And I think the prudent thing to do would be decide how we want to approach it. And particularly if we're headed for public hearing in the not too distant future, communicate to the Planning Commission what we're doing and why, so that, again, we don't get a negative referral back if, in fact, we're now on the same page. There was a number of comments that came in during the public hearing process about our commercial recreation zone, particularly with regard to Sunny's Place and the whole issue of golf centers. So I think the issue is, does the Commission want to proceed with the commercial recreation zone? And whether they do or don't, the issue of golf center should probably be addressed because there is a second golf center, I believe it's Pleasant View, which is in a residential district. And it was not my understanding from my work with the commission previously, the commission wanted to make any existing use non-conforming. So I think it's a change that we would need to make for Pleasant View. And if the commission is not interested in proceeding with the commercial recreation zone, that would put Sunny's Place back in under a golf center type of regulation. There was also a comment from the Planning Commission. You may recall, as part of the regulations, we eliminated the minimum floor area requirements and eliminated a requirement for a full basement foundation. The Planning Commission did not favor that, and again, this may require a 2/3 vote on the part of the commission, so I just bring that to your attention for us to talk about. It's a 5-member board. 2/3 means 4 out of 5 votes. So just bring that to your attention. And then finally, there was a comment at the public hearing that, for somewhere in the process, that the 1,500-foot separation of food service drive-through windows be eliminated, which could allow for drive-throughs in closer proximity than they're currently allowed. A number of things, as you know, have changed in the past year, but that's something the commission may want to consider as part of this. I think summary of the changes made, this is, again, what is reflected in the regulations before you, and then the discussion about summary of possible issues remaining is the commission could give me direction to include these in the regulations or not. It really depends in terms of what you want to do moving ahead. And that kind of brings us up to speed. Any questions or comments so far in terms of where we're at? So if none, what I propose we start to do is just, I believe I shared with Jen 2 files, one of which was the entire set of regulations so you can see all of the pages. And then the second one was just the pages that have changed. So I guess maybe we'll start to go through if there's any pages that jump out.
Are you referring, Carl Walton for the record, Glenn, are you referring to the document titled Summary of Changes Made?
That's what I was just talking about, Carl. And now I'm actually looking at the regulations themselves. Do you have those nearby?
Yes, I do, but is it something about where you make changes?
Yep. Did you have any questions or comments about that?
They're highlighted.
About the summary of changes made?
Yeah, anything in there? Because what I was planning on doing now, if it's okay with the commission, is start to go through the actual regulations page by page, see where we're at. How would you guys like to proceed?
Jill, you're muted.
I'm muted in case I have to yell at my daughter. I don't want everyone to get for me.
Because the meeting's being taped, I get that, right?
So, no, actually, so in this, the revised regulation, the big copy,
Yeah.
everything in there that is changed, is that in red?
Yes, it is, Jill. Thank you.
Okay, so it's all, so there was just 2. There was that, and then there was the summary changes made.
Correct.
So the summary changes were like the last things we were working on or things that needed to be addressed before, because we were basically finished at our last
I
point.
think, yeah, about a year ago we had decided to go to public hearing, and I think we, in early December, scheduled the public hearing for January, and that's where we were at. So the first part of the summary of changes made is things that have really happened with the commission since that time. The adoption of the detached housing development zone, the work that the commission had been recent applications on religious institutions and earthwork in terms of looking at those 2 issues, and then farm winery, which again had been quite a bit of discussion. So I took a leap in terms of trying to address those issues, and then again just addressing the other issues that had come up in the public hearing.
Carl Walton for the record. So, Glenn, do you see further discussion on some of these topics is coming when we get to them in the review of the regulation?
I think I would like to help the commission get to a set of regulations that reflects where you're at today in terms of your desires moving forward, reflecting the issues you've been talking about for the past year, and moving ahead. So the changes that were made are things that I feel you've been working on, making progress on. I'm trying to give you a placeholder, if you will, in terms of where I think those conversations are at, and I need feedback from you on those. And then the issues that came up last year in terms of the second part of that document, summary of possible issues remaining, I think you can anticipate that those are likely to come up again at this public hearing. So if in fact we want to address them, we can. If not, we can listen to them again as part of the record moving ahead and decide what to do after the public hearing.
I think it would be to our benefit to have a discussion about the things that came up that maybe have been questioned in the public hearing. I don't think we can just ignore it.
Yep, that makes sense. So I think my proposal, the summary was meant to be a summary. So I think it's okay with the commission. What I'd like to do is start to work through the regulations, call out page numbers and things on them, so that if there's any comments or concerns the commission has, we can talk about those. Does that sound like a reasonable approach?
Are we
Sounds good to me.
Are we going through every single page or just the changed
I'm
pages?
basically going to focus on the pages,
Okay.
Jen.
The
So
changed.
the first one I have is section 2.2.
Okay.
I realized after I had sent it to Jen, there is no page number at the bottom. The very bottom of this page has a blue box saying flood-related terms. And on this page is a proposed change to the definition of earthwork. I think originally we had called it sort of excavation and filling. And now we're defining earthwork as excavation, removal, filling, regrading, and or physical or mechanical relocation of any kind of soil or earth matter. That's a pretty comprehensive definition, and it's relevant when we get back into the standard section later. Any questions or concerns on that?
I'm not sure where you mean
Yeah.
that is located.
That's 8-4, right?
Nope. It would be page 14. It's just not numbered.
So the
And
page,
Okay, I got it.
thank you, Carl. Everybody else got it?
yep, I just had a question. This is Lucas. I think you said mechanical. I was just wondering, are we, with the new definition of earthwork, I mean, is that include somebody with a shovel and a wheelbarrow?
That's what.
Yep.
But then I think he's throwing us over that.
So
Essentially,
somebody
there is-
that,
After 1,000 cubic yards, yep.
oh, after 1,000 cubic yards. Okay. So,
So this is how we define earthwork, and the threshold is, we'll get back to that in the regulatory section. The reason I used the phraseology physical or mechanical, if there's tremendous erosion, that doesn't require a special permit. That's a remedial action and an enforcement action, but it's not, you had to get a special permit before the rainstorm. So that's why it says physical or mechanical relocation.
okay. I just wanted to make sure if somebody planting a tree or a shrub, they're not, having to come. But 1,000 cubic yards is quite a bit, so that covers that.
I think the next page that I have is page 25. This is something I just wasn't quite clear on in terms of the language I received. I changed the definition of tasting room to say it's accessory to a farm winery or a farm brewery. Some of the material I received seemed to indicate that the word distillery was no longer in play. So if distillery is meant to be in play, then we want to add distillery back in here. So a tasting room can be associated with any of those three. But I thought that the text was telling me winery, brewery, and distillery wasn't in there. So if you meant for distillery to be in, please let me know. We'll add distillery in here now.
Well, Carl Walton, for the record, I intended it to include all three. I'm the one who put together the document in question, I believe. And I'm not aware of why you thought it was taken out.
I think the word just wasn't included, Carl, in certain locations, so I assumed that might have been intentional. So now we've clarified it, and I will add farm distillery back in here, and that will also play in other regulations later when we're talking about that particular issue. Next page that I have is bottom of page 30. So I think, if I understood again the text that was delivered to me for consideration, these two line items in these tables would have allowed a winery or a brewery distillery as a principal use of property. Now, this language has been carried over a couple of pages so that a farm, winery, brewery, distillery is now an accessory use to a farm. Just a subtle distinction that if you're not growing the grapes, the hops, or the apples, you can't be doing a farm, brewery, winery, or distillery. So, again, it's the difference between a principal and accessory use. Agriculture is permitted, clearly in this table, but the brewery, winery, distillery is only allowed because you're growing the crop. So as a result,
Correct.
okay. So the net effect of this is on page 30, line items 5 and 6 are deleted. They show up back on page 35, and we'll get there in a few moments.
Sorry, I had a question. The principal use of property, accessory use farms, does that allow for any consideration for if somebody was starting a winery, brewery, or distillery, growing hops, grapes, barley, wheat, they would, they could not start distilling or making beer, immediately. They would have to, usually they have to buy some of the different products for the first year or two. Is there, I guess I'm just trying to understand if we allow for 1 to 2 years, because that's a significant undertaking to have a farm to, for 2-3 years until you have enough products to distill or brew or winery or whatever it may be.
I think this would be something for the commission to consider as part of the permitting process. For example, I'm looking way ahead now, Lucas, in terms of actually in the farm, winery, brewery, distillery language, and it does say there that farm winery shall be accessory to a vineyard growing grapes. So when does that actually happen? I don't know that you have to have harvested the grapes, but you certainly have to have the grapes growing.
Yeah.
Claire?
So here is where the state definitions of farm wineries came in. And, I don't know that we've specifically referenced that as the place where we see the size limit for that bottling operation. The farm winery program had a certain bottle number, which was actually huge and probably more than a lot of small wineries could do. So anyway, within the state of Connecticut farm winery regulations that were brought in during one of our meetings earlier, they have a number of bottles, but they also have an allowance for, they have to produce 25% of the crops on the site. But knowing that a winery gets planted and it might be 7 years before they get a crop, there's an allowance for amount of time where they can import product into the space and do the manufacturing even before they're producing the full 25% minimum on site. So I'm wondering, since you brought that up, is there a better way to reference that farm winery definition, or should we work in the limitation on the size of the winery in terms of, this regulation? Because again, I don't think we want a major Milwaukee brewery bottling company in a residential neighborhood. So I'm just wondering if we can just regulate the statute as it currently is, saying this is our definition of a farm winery. That would answer the question that
Yes, I think there's a
get
couple
that.
things going. I think there's
I
a
was going
couple
to
things
mention
going
that this
on.
is also a special use permit, so anything coming before us, you can add things to it, because it's just, we just want to keep it general, and then you can expand the restrictions or definition to each individual applicant, correct?
Yeah, I think, let me go back, if you will. I'd like to go back and look at the state terminology and what the state permits in this situation. I think there are 4 subparts to this. There's the manufacturing and production. That involves the use of grapes, and you're allowed to use out-of-state grapes for a certain percentage, and local has to be local Connecticut for the rest. There's also retail sales, tasting room and public events, and then function rooms and private events. So I think the challenge for the commission is when the cart gets ahead of the horse in terms of the actual situation. I think what we want to do is enable the commission to have this discussion as part of the permitting process in terms of, when it might be permitted or, when it may not. So, but I think the first step is, Paige, it's been some time since I went back and read the state standards in detail on that particular issue. So I'd like to have a chance to do that.
Yeah, I think we did talk about it at length, and one of the materials that was cited a couple of times in discussions around farm wineries was that it's a Connecticut farm winery, and there are certain standards to that. Again, I think that we probably could and should mention that reference, or at least take in some of those real specs to make sure that what we're talking about here is a farm winery.
Yep.
Now, and Lucas, Sherry, for the record, if I understand correctly, the state standards and details for Connecticut, do they call all that information out? Is that correct?
I believe they call out most of it.
Okay, because I guess I may have been born and raised on a farm. I didn't grow grapes or anything, but there was an expert creating the Connecticut state standards and details, and I just, from my feeling, I don't want to start trying to provide more expertise when I know I personally don't have that in that area.
Carl Walton, for the record, Lucas, I don't think any of us want to either.
Okay.
Well, that was jumping way ahead, so I'd like to turn us back to the definitions again for a moment before we'll be back there in the not-too-distant future. So the other change I wanted to point out was we're back in the definition section on page 31. And this is where the text has been changed to read place of worship or religious institution, which again I believe is the phraseology used in your current regulations.
Correct.
Okay?
Lucas, for the record, this is for our town attorney. Do you have any concerns with the way it reads? Obviously, I know this is a very important issue for many within state and feds, but I want to make sure that we're, I guess, within our rights as a commission without infringing upon people's religious rights.
Redirect the question.
Carl, he was asking you.
Mandalina?
You're muted,
You're
Carl.
on mute, Carl.
I'm sorry, I said I had to step out for a minute. So I missed that. When I left, you were still talking about farm wineries. So I assume you're talking about the definition of religious uses. Is that where you're?
Yep. And I had just asked if, based upon the current and proposed changes, if you see any issues or concerns from a legal standpoint.
Well, the plan right now is to go back to the prior definitions so that houses of worship and religious institutions are, so you're not making any, if you go along with that, you're not making any changes. So I don't see how I would see that definition is broad enough, as we learned
Okay.
a
All
few
right.
months ago.
Yeah. I mean, I don't want to get into RUPLA or all the.
Yep.
So again, if you don't have any concerns, issues, perfect.
I don't, no.
Okay. That's it.
I think the next page for the commission would be page 35. And again, as I mentioned earlier, this is the page now where we identify winery, distillery, brewery as an accessory use. And so this is where it is. And I think as Carl indicated earlier, I'm going to add farm distillery in here as well. I think the next page for the commission takes us all the way up to 82, I believe. This is the detached housing development zone. I did something unique in here because the commission had adopted this regulation. I took it and made it black text. And then the only thing which is red in this text right now are changes that I made to conform with the new terminology, phraseology, and structure of the regulations. So on these pages, I think you can see that use the word section. I think before it might have been article. I corrected the cross-section, cross-references in the regulations. There's a reference to the Connecticut Department of Environmental Protection, and clearly it's the Connecticut Department of Energy and Environmental Protection, so I made that change. And then I think made a minor change with regard to a statutory reference. So I think I've gotten everything right there, and I don't think any of those changes change the substance of what the commission adopted.
Glenn, is there something missing on section C definitions, detached housing? Like a second line?
It's just the way it was printed, Joe.
Okay, so it ends with the word any and there's nothing after that? Detached housing units are single-family dwelling units that do not share any.
No, then it
The
says,
next line
And
says
after
walls.
that is walls or other structural elements
Mine
with
doesn't
other
have that.
units. Mine doesn't have the first sentence.
right,
Mine
My copy.
it may have been the copier. Mine doesn't have the second half of the first sentence.
You are not seeing that, Jen?
I'm not. I see detached housing units, and then it just diagonally goes. So I don't know if it was.
Yeah, and what
The way
I
it
see on my
copied.
copy is I see the second sentence. Well, I see walls and other structural elements with other units, and I don't see the first line.
Well, we'll just make sure that's fixed.
In mine, I only see the first line and not the second line.
Well, it says
So-
walls or other structural elements or with other units. So
Is anybody looking at the online version? Or
I
the
think
electronic version?
I believe, Glenn, what it is, it's just a function of the way the copy went through.
Yeah.
Because it's also visible to me on other pages
Okay.
Yeah.
that's happened.
yeah, it is
But-
visible on other pages. Yep.
Because we're missing different sections and they were all copied the same, that would make sense.
Right.
Yeah, it's
Otherwise,
like
we all
the
have-
paper got jacked in the copier
Yep.
or something.
Right.
Okay, so I think we want to try to make sure when it comes time for the commission to make a decision or vote here,
Yeah, we
I'd
gotta
like
have
to
a
make
real
sure you have
copy.
a complete copy in front of you so that we're making a cogent choice. I think that moves us ahead quite a ways to section 612, which I believe is the farm, winery, farm distillery, farm brewery. That's page 111. There's quite a bit of red here. And again, I think this is based on the material that I was given and just highlighted some things for possible discussion, both in terms of the yellow highlighted text and also some of the blue boxes. If the commission is comfortable with these issues and has talked these through, then we can move on. If there are issues in here you think it's important we talk about, then we should do that now.
Carl Walton, for the record, you're going to add back in farm distillery here as well?
Yeah, I've made a note, Carl, yeah.
Okay.
And Paige Rassett here. When it talks about accessory, I went to the definition of accessory, and you have a good show on accessory buildings for residential, but not for business. Just wondering if we want.
What do you mean? Can you? I'm not sure what you're saying, Paige.
In terms of having a drawing, we've got a drawing under accessory in the definitions towards the front, but it only shows residential space, not showing anything about what accessory means for business. And
You mean commercial?
Oh, you mean as if it was in a different zone than residential?
Correct.
Yeah, it's interesting, Paige. I mean, the pictures were meant to be illustrative of the concept of something secondary to the principal thing. So it didn't mean to limit it to, business or residential. So I'm just thinking now that maybe what makes sense is for me to mix those pictures up so that they're not, you're correct, all those pictures at the moment are residential pictures. And so what I'd like to do is maybe find the pairing of business-related things to make the parallel clear.
Well, Carl Walton, for the record, I know that in some of the public meetings we've had, it's been a pretty clear message that while people may not have a problem with a winery tasting room in a residential area, they might not welcome a more commercial approach where you're setting up more of a banquet facility, etc., with an expected different use level, or I don't know, it's just a different use. I mean, you picture a tasting room, you picture people coming to taste wine, maybe have a glass of wine, maybe have some snacks that go with it, maybe even listen to an acoustic guitar player, etc. But you get a whole different thing once you get onto a facility that's, just looking to be a destination or a venue.
A banquet hall.
Right now, I tried to set this up, it would break these items out so the commission could review each of these as part of any application. So somebody may apply to the commission for establishment of a farm brewery, farm winery, farm distillery, and they might request manufacturing and production. They might request retail sales of those products on the site. They may request a tasting room so that people can taste the beverages. They may request the ability to host public events. They may request the ability to have function rooms for weddings or other things, and otherwise have private events. And I think as we start to go through the list, I think they start off from things you would expect. The farm brewer, farm winery, production, manufacturing would be kind of intuitive. And then it starts to grow from there. So these are all currently special permit accessory activities, and I think the commission, as part of the special permit, I would hope you would have the tools to evaluate each request and decide what you think is right or fair in terms of this application.
That sounds reasonable, because that allows people to submit on any of those issues or actions or accessories you just mentioned, but it allows us to look at each applicant individually, correct?
I would think that I was submitting an application, I would probably apply for all of these. That would provide the greatest opportunity for success of my farm brewery, farm winery, farm distillery business. And I think
Yeah.
the commission could look at any application given its location and determine which ones would be appropriate or not appropriate in those situations. So
Okay.
if there are standards that you think would be useful to guide the commission, we should include those now.
I, for one, think it would be a very good idea to develop some standards, because I don't know how else we could rate a proposal for one thing over the other. I mean, I thought, in my mind, I thought the production and manufacture was out of our hands. I mean, you could basically have a farm and get a permit from the state and federal government to manufacture and produce wine or beer or distilled products and not have a tasting room.
That's. I was under the same understanding.
I believe that's the case. You don't need to have a tasting room.
Glenn,
No, but I was thinking more that what we're looking to permit with the regulation is, I mean, if you can manufacture and produce without us, then we're looking for a way to enhance that for you, to allow you to add a tasting room experience. I mean, for lack of a better word, or
Yeah.
to invite people in to see your process, or
Yeah.
whatever you do on a small, like.
but
We're trying to create, Carl.
that's not
And you
what page
correct
it's
me
on.
if I'm wrong, but we're trying to create regulations that would support a farm winery to have a tasting room.
Correct.
Correct?
Correct.
Oh,
Open.
yeah.
I mean, what ended up coming out of the Plan of Conservation and Development on this was that this would be a great tool to encourage the preservation of large tracts of land in agriculture. If they had a viable use beyond what was traditional, more and more places in Connecticut have wineries.
Yeah.
And it gives them an outlet of sorts to help sell their product. But here again, having said that, we're not looking to create, destination places everywhere either.
Glenn, Jennifer Roy for the record. I just wanted to point out back to, I don't know if Paige lost her internet connection she's on. I think her comment was on page 22 where we have principal and accessory. I think her point was that it's basically just a house and a garage.
Yep.
So your pictures only seem to be residential. That's all. I don't.
No, I agree. I think I had mentioned earlier that my intention is to go back and mix those pictures up.
Okay.
So they're
Yeah.
not all residential. The
Okay.
issue of principal and accessory transcends individual
Right.
use classes.
Okay. I didn't catch that part.
So I think in terms of the farm, brewery, winery, distillery, I identified these major categories of uses and activities to give the commission the ability to kind of walk through them one by one. It's, for example, the common theme in all of these is you have to be growing something. You have to either be growing the grapes, the hops, the fruit, whatever you're going to do. After that, you can mix and match. You could have manufacturing and production done elsewhere. Take the grapes, send them over to Enfield. Enfield processes them and brings back, the wine. That could happen. So then you might be looking at retail sales on the site and a tasting room. Okay, that's fine. Somebody else may come along and say, well, I'm actually going to do my production on site, retail sales, a tasting room, and I also want a function room. Because I think the goal here is to grow the product, give people the opportunity to sell the product. That's the whole purpose and intent here. And then the issue that I think some communities do struggle with is the public events and the private events, and whether or not those transcend what's appropriate in the neighborhood or the location. And I think that's where the commission gets the special permit tools to be able to review those. And I think the more standards or criteria that will guide applicants and guide the commission could be helpful. And I need some help from you guys on what those might be.
I definitely agree. I mean, we do have to have some sort of a standard, and in the research that I was doing, I mean, I saw some references to like what percentage of the space could be dedicated to the tasting room / function area versus the total area of the production space, etc. And I guess we'd have to try and come up with something that we felt worked for us. And also standards on accessibility. I mean, something that's easily accessible might have the potential for more than something that's not.
Yep. So, I did have some specific questions on these. Is it all right with you if I kind of walk through those for a sec? On page 112, I think the language said related products. And I was just concerned that the phrase, this is under retail sales, line 2. It says a building or a portion of a building on the farm can be used for sale of wine and wine byproducts and beer byproducts by the glass bottle barrel in related products. I'm thinking, what else is that? Because that could be...
I mean, in my mind, when I put related products in there, it was wine openers, beer steins, things of that nature that directly related to the manufacture, production, and sale, tasting, whatever. It could be picnic baskets.
No, I think the word directly, Carl, the word directly, I think, does it there. I think I'm okay with directly related because that means things such as corkscrews, beer mugs, things like that. But it doesn't mean blueberry pie and
it doesn't mean a selection of wines from around the world either.
I think you're allowed to sell wines from other Connecticut vineyards under the state regulations, but I agree with you. It doesn't involve the other stuff. So I think directly related products helps significantly there. Commission okay with that?
Yes.
And then I think down below, in B, it says including related food products. So the farm, winery, or brewery may include the accessory sale of wine and wine byproducts, beer byproducts, including related food products. I wasn't sure. Does that mean cheese?
I assume cheese, crackers, stuff like that, right?
I mean, I think generally in tasting rooms they have little bowls.
This is retail sales.
Retail, okay.
This is what they get to sell there.
So how do you, related food products, what is that?
I think if the commission is comfortable, I think Luke has said cheese, crackers, etc. I think that can provide, but you can't sell TVs and refrigerators, right? So we want, or roast beef. You can't sell beef.
Yeah.
Okay, so let me put cheese and crackers there, and I think that provides some clarification. Are you okay with that?
Yes.
Then it goes on to say, and locally produced products. What is that?
State of Connecticut?
Locally produced products could be vegetables, jams, jellies, ciders. I don't know, right? Anything like a cottage industry would produce, right? Local.
Well, I think of anything within Connecticut, just like the chairwoman just mentioned, which kind of ties into the cheese and crackers, kind of,
Does it have to be? Does it have to be not grown, but
If I make birdhouses, can I
does
sell
it have to
birdhouses?
be there on the site in order to be sold there? Something like that when it say local
It says locally produced.
produced.
So
Right.
honey, or like Glenn just said, birdhouses, if he makes birdhouses and he lives in Summers, can he sell them there?
Oh, birds do eat crackers.
Locally produced products would mean to me. It's so far removed from the locally that
And I think it'd be an enforcement challenge too. I mean, if Jen gets a call, was she supposed to go out there and show me where you got these birdhouses from? So I just think, I don't know if it's important to the commission or not, but
Sure.
I'd like to give them flexibility, but avoid a problem later with enforcement or otherwise. So.
Is a birdhouse produced or manufactured? I mean, what's this? The word produced is throwing me a little bit. Locally produced.
You could say it was manufactured.
Yeah.
I mean,
They're almost I know they're different words, but similar. You could argue, both are kind of the same. We're not talking assembly of, products.
Is the commission comfortable with the phrase "and other products produced in Summers or manufactured"? In other words, maybe we could have an opportunity to celebrate local businesses, something that's made in town that's unique. And then
I would have no issue with that at all.
Yeah.
it's almost like a local farmer's market kind
exactly.
Correct.
Yeah.
Yes.
I think that protects Jen from having to wonder where something was made. It's produced or manufactured in summer, so it's a local celebration. And I think
If it says made in China, maybe she has to look.
Well, I'm pretty sure you could have made in China wine openers in terms of.
No, this is just the other. We already covered that. This is now the phraseology here. We got that one.
For other products, sure.
Now, it says here that in item C that the area of retail sales must be within or contiguous to the tasting room and no greater than the total floor area dedicated
To the retail area and tasting room.
Yep. That's straight. That doesn't make any sense.
Yep. Sounds like a lawyer wrote it.
Oh, I'm sorry.
Do we want to have any limit on the size of the retail sales room?
Well, I would not want to really try to, God forbid this is successful. Last thing I want to do is, hey, we were on a roll and the zoning commission wouldn't allow us to go over 100,000 in sales or something.
The last thing I would want to do would be to have somebody open up something that's, like a square mile around the building and right off the get-go.
So I'm just wondering if we say that the retail sales can be no greater than the total floor area dedicated to the tasting room.
Yeah.
That sounds reasonable.
Yep.
Okay.
Very reasonable.
The hours of operation here are 11 to 8 and 11 to 6. Is that too limiting for, a wedding party, or is that appropriate, or what's your thought?
11
This is for the tasting room,
This is for the retail sales. We'll get to the tasting
and
room.
this is for the retail sales.
Yep.
That's fine.
Well, retail sales just starting at 11 is a little late. Most, open, 8, 9?
But Lucas,
It's not in a shopping center, Lucas.
This is an accessory. This is an accessory to the wine. So, I don't know how many people are going to be up there at 10 o'clock having wine. I think the tasting room and that has to be open for the gift shop and everything else to be open. So I think they should all run together.
Well, correct. So 8 or 9 maybe, it's just, whatever. If the committee's good with 11 and till 8.
I think there's aren't there state rules on the hours of operation, Glenn?
I don't know. I'll go back and if you think
For
there
farm-
are again, I'll take a look.
For farm
I'm sure there are state maximum rules, and they probably mirror what they are for liquor stores. But this isn't a liquor store.
No, yeah. I thought that it was more, especially for tasting rooms. I thought I recalled reading in the state requirements that it's restricted by the state, and I don't think it's 10 o'clock on a Saturday like a liquor store. I feel like 7 or 8 is what it said. I'm not sure about opening, but
Those times were taken from a host of other towns' regulations that were
no, I've read
the same.
Yeah, no, someone had provided me with state information, but it was just so much information. Glenn will check it, I guess.
I'll take a look. I think that takes us to the top of the next page, page 113. This is now the tasting room. And oftentimes as part of the tasting room, there are public events that go along with that, and those can include artist receptions and exhibitions, painting classes, music entertainment, related seminars, meetings, tastings, promotional activities. And the question is, can it be held in the tasting room and then adjoining outside areas? So again, this is now an issue where music outside could impact others. You manage this as part of the special permit. I imagine that you could, but this again is the tasting room. People are going to go to the winery; they're going to want to taste. So it's a natural accessory use, but it also has perhaps a tendency to grow and become something different than what we anticipated. So the more events that they can move in the tasting room means the more opportunities they might have to get people into to sell wine, beer, liquor, etc. So do you want to deal with this as part of the special permit? Do you want to put any limitations on this today?
Special use permit?
Yeah, this is all going to be a special use permit, Lucas.
Yeah, but I was saying, I putting limitations on it right now. I guess
Go ahead, Lucas.
No, I was just saying, I think, each application, location, there's a lot of criteria. So maybe we should just consider it by applicant versus trying to anticipate the restrictions we want to put on it today.
I think rather than distinguishing based on applicant, the commission should distinguish based on location. So look at the intensity of the activity for the location that is proposed and make a decision that way.
That makes the most sense.
Okay, yeah.
Looking at this is, I think what might help the commission a little bit is if I merge A and C together. And so what that means is that a building or a portion of a building can be used as a tasting room, and activities such as receptions, music, etc., can occur in that tasting room. Then the next part is outdoor patios, porches, and grassy picnic areas may be allowed as an appurtenance of the tasting room when approved by the commission, and then activities can occur there to the extent approved by the commission. Because
Yeah, that makes sense too.
Okay.
That's good. Thank you.
We would have to also, I think, Glenn, have the ability to regulate whether it's like, a string quartet or the Who.
I think as part of your approval, you will need to consider the location. I think we end up in situations, as we did with Sunny's Place, where the high school graduation night party that we had in years past, probably didn't have it this year, but
Nope.
in any event, and now we start to get amplification of music, and what are you going to do? So I think these things have a tendency to grow. So I think the commission would have to be firm as part of the special permit, because it's really hard to get the genie back in the bottle after the genie's gotten out.
Correct.
So I think the hours of operation, maybe we want to split this up too in terms of inside and outside. Because if I've got a wedding going on in a beautiful place, I don't really want to tell the guests to, they got to bail at 8 o'clock.
I agree, yeah.
I agree too, Glenn, but I don't know that we're not trying to open a wedding venue in every one of these wineries.
Understood. And these are public events too. So the issue is we may have a fundraiser for the Summers Chamber of Commerce or something, and they're going to want to go 7 to 9. And the issue is we can't.
Oh, well, could we say on the weekends, 11 p.m. and during the week, 9 or something?
I think first we need to find out what the regulations are governing,
No.
if any,
I
governing.
don't mean to cut you off, Carl, but I was just scrolling through the state website, and most of the wineries close at 5 or 6 o'clock. Some stay open till 8, but they open at about 11. And there's one in Clinton that's 9 o'clock, but most of them are daylight hours. I mean, they're early. Some have extended, for this spring, summer, fall to winter, they extended in the summer. But they look like they all open like around 11 or 12 o'clock, and most of them close by 6, and then some are open later.
Can you?
About 5 hours.
Yeah.
But Jennifer Roy, for the record, I'm just thinking, as we talk about these hours of operation, again, if it's going to be regulated by a special use permit, which they already do for places such as Sunny's Place and some of these other restaurants that have outdoor dining and entertainment, the commission stipulates, acoustic only, and hours that it can be on the weekend, outside, inside. Like, if we remove that hours of operation, usually they put that as a condition of approval.
I'm okay with
Based
that.
on the location, I mean, if you have a distillery and it's over in the industrial zone with no residential in a certain area, the commission might let them stay till 9 or 10,
Yeah.
If the state
Can I
permit.
interrupt here for a second?
Sure, Carl.
So hours of operation is one thing that I would prefer that you have almost set in stone and not treat people differently based upon location. Now, you might say 11 to 6, and then you might have a proviso in there that says if there are no residential structures located within X amount of feet, then you may consider going to 7 or 8 o'clock. But I'd like there to be hard standards as to when you consider moving the hours. I will tell you my experience with these kinds of operations, which is, I wouldn't call it very substantial, but I've had a few of these. I represent a few folks who own these kinds of operations in towns who try to, who want them because it's, it's the way of keeping the family farm in town. The law of unintended consequences applies to these operations probably more than any other type of operation. So my view would be that I would suggest you start out small, see how it happens, what happens along the way, and you can amend the regulations and change things along the way, because however you try to put something in the regulations that's going to cover every possible scenario, and you might think you have it, you're not going to have it. There's always going to be a loophole that someone's going to be able to go through, and it's going to be a tough time. Like when Glenn says, it's once the genie's out of the bottle with these, it's impossible, especially because now you're talking about I'll take, for example, there's one in very successful one in where I live in East Granby, and the limit has been pushed in every regard. And of course, once you start being successful, you want to be more successful. So you try to push the envelope even more or get concessions from the commission. So, when you start talking about, here's an example. You might think this is a silly one, but it's not. So you allow music indoors, okay? Let's say in your tasting room or your event room, whatever it is. Those rooms are going to probably at some point have balconies or sitting areas, even if they're on the second floor. And what's going to happen when the weather's nice, those doors are going to fly open, and the outside and the inside are going to be basically indistinguishable. So now you're going to have live music outdoors, even if they're playing indoors. So I think my advice would be to start small, regulate the heck out of it, and if it seems too onerous along the way, you can always open the doors a little bit, no pun intended. But these things can get out of control very fast.
Yeah. Good point.
I think that approach is very similar to the way that we dealt with.
'With. 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 'With.
cafe and festival permit,
Right.
where we held them pretty close until we were comfortable that it was controlled. It wasn't going to get out of hand. And I think it's a good approach because it worked well all the way around.
And for
Because
that,
the reality is, when you're talking about someone manufacturing their own wine and allowing events like weddings or whatever, they're going to figure out fairly soon as to which part of the business is more successful than the other. Is having the weddings there going to be more successful than selling a $14 bottle of wine? These business models for these types of operations change real quickly. Within a year, they'll know what works and what doesn't. And if, and at that point, they come back and say, hey, I thought it was going to be this, but the public wants this. Will you consider that? Even if you have to change the regulations to make that work. But I would try to be tighter, at least with the hours of operation, the number of events you're going to allow over the course of a year, and the capacity is going to be a big issue. Because you have to remember that, generally speaking, most of these parking spaces are not going to be paved. They're going to be temporary spaces. And if you've got 15 or 20 acres and you've got 10 acres of, 1 acre of building and 10 acres of vines, you got 9 acres of parking left, and you can shove a lot of cars in 9 acres. So that's the other thing you're going to have to be concerned about. So my advice, again, start small, see how it works, grow from there.
Thank you, Carl. This is Paige. Just thinking about sort of the difference between having these businesses in a business or commercial zone versus the residential zone. Would it make sense to try to split them up a little bit? Because, I'd love to see one of the warehouse type areas all of a sudden have a distillery, and sure, let that stay open till as late as can be. But, it might make sense to split it up and figure out what we generally would say is okay in the industrial commercial zones versus residential areas. Residential area, I heard someone say let them stay open till 11 o'clock at night. It's a residential area. And, again, when you have music going, I don't think that kind of activity works very well late at night. Certainly not after 8 p.m. I'd probably argue a little bit earlier. So we could talk about that, but, again, I think Lucas had mentioned a place in an industrial zone. It's like, again, if conditions are right, I think we could be much more open about what we allow there. Does anyone think it makes sense to break it up between the different zones and what we allow there?
Paige, I totally agree 100%. If that's something we can do, I would encourage everybody to go on the State of Connecticut website and look at these different wineries and how they're open. Some are open from 11 to 5, and then during the high season they close at 4:30, or they stop serving. They shut the tasting room down an hour before, or every day has a different schedule. I mean, it's pretty. They're all listed there. It's pretty interesting. They all close pretty early. Most of them. I'd say 90% of them close at 5 or 6 o'clock.
That's been my experience as well. It'd be very unusual to see one of these open past 7 o'clock.
Mm-hmm.
Jill,
Now the events are a different story, but that's up for you to decide.
Jill, I would just ask that you share with us you can email it to us or whatever, that address you're looking at that shows the summary.
Where am I? This is just the Department of Agriculture Connecticut. Welcome to the Connecticut wine country.
Okay.
I will get the I'll get it and forward it over the actual link.
That would be
Do you
good.
guys have any apple groves in Summers?
Yes, we do.
Where they have pick your own kind of thing?
Well, you pick your own peaches. I'm not sure if we have apples or not, actually.
Yeah, Irish Bend
Because
apples.
you have to understand
They have
all
apples
those
there, too.
all those fruits, they're now you're talking about
Potentially.
making hard apple cider.
Mhm.
That's a distillery.
Potentially. Hey, we have
And
a
hard
big grain
peach
process.
cider, I'm sure there's a peach drink someone could manufacture from their peaches.
Oh,
So-
come on. Blueberries, potatoes, all of it.
Vodka from potatoes.
The only thing I wanted to add, based on what David said earlier, is that I think in the business zones we allow for restaurants, taverns, inns, and other types of activity. So there, I think you can do the tasting room and the other activities. You don't need to grow the grapes, the apples, or the other stuff on the property. So my
True.
sense was that we're showing it as an accessory use in the residential zone because you have to grow this stuff there. But in a business zone, you could grow the apples or the grapes or something in Summers and then open up in a business zone, a tasting room or something else like that, and you wouldn't have the limitations on hours there because you would be in a business zone. So that was my thought process as I crafted this, and I think our recording today sort of reflects that approach philosophically if the commission is okay with that.
As always, Glenn, thank you.
Well, Paige, I can't
Yeah.
say I always anticipate where this is going to go, but I may have gotten that.
So then
It
you
occurs to
could
me-
even have thinking it's residentially oriented.
It's occurred to me based on our conversation here that I'm going to reorganize these regulations a little bit. I think I'm going to call out hours of operations, and so we can actually talk through each type of activity and what hours of operation might be permitted. I think manufacturing, for example, I think if they want to be there around the clock bottling wine, I don't know. Do we care what goes on inside of,
No. I mean, my perception of it was what we were talking about for hours of operation was dealing with the consumer during those hours.
The retail side.
As far as production goes, I would expect there'd be much more to do than just like between 11 and 8 on a Saturday.
During
Yeah,
the
I want to add into that shipping and receiving. In other words, we're not doing shipping and receiving at 6 in the morning. Okay, so we're going to put a limitation on that. But I think I have a sense now, on behalf of the commission, I'm a little concerned about the outside areas and how this can spill out. So I'm going to try to craft language that gives the commission to just have the applicant clearly declare what their intentions are to give the commission the information to make a good decision.
Correct.
So I think I just want to make sure that I think this, as Carl pointed out, Carl Landolin, that this outside issue is potentially one of the more sensitive ones. And I think that also brings us to something sensitive, which is the whole function room and private event. Now, this is not walking in off the street. This could be a corporate meeting. It could be a bar mitzvah. It could be weddings, corporate functions, etc.
Can I say something here? So one of the things that I've learned from experience is that if you want to limit capacity, you need to do it here as well, and probably more importantly here. So, for instance, if you talk to your fire marshal and ask that person what the capacity is in a certain room, 300 square feet, 500 square feet, whatever, you get 3 or 4 numbers. All right? If you're sitting down at a table with chairs, the capacity is going to be 1 number. If you just have chairs lined up, the capacity is going to be much higher. And if you have standing room where you're having, let's say, a cocktail party, the capacity is going to be, and the capacity numbers for standing are staggering. Okay? I mean, you can, in terms of a fire marshal capacity, you can get 300 people into a fairly small area if they're all standing around talking to each other. So, if you're thinking about leaving capacity to the fire marshal, just be cognizant of that. or maybe you don't care about capacity. I don't know, but you know, more capacity, the more parking. You know, you have to plan for. And then, of course, then you've got the outside and the nice, you know, if this is a bucolic, people want to get married there, they're going to be outside in the tent in June and, you know, so on and so forth. So I don't know how you want to deal with that issue.
Well, is it Lucas, for the record, is it covered in the state building codes? You know, the occupancy as far as like medical, retail, standing.
Yeah, it's the fire marshal dictates that.
But you're saying that we should go above and beyond?
I'm saying as a zoning commission, you don't have to use the fire marshal standards to determine capacity of these operations. If you rely on the fire marshal standards, what I'm saying is be cognizant of the fact that you may think that all these events are going to be people sitting at a table, when that's not, where the capacity might, let's say, be 100, when actually what's planned is more of like a cocktail party setting where there are very few chairs and everyone's just standing around, where the capacity could be 300 in the same area.
Yep.
I never knew that. So do they come up with 3 different numbers, or
yes?
When they look at building, I didn't know that.
Principal use always has different, occupancies, medical, retail, blah blah blah. You know, whatever specific use it has. I think it's called out.
Well, it's not only use; it's depending on the layout of the room. Again.
Yeah, correct. Egress.
Tables and chairs is one thing. People standing is quite another.
Carl, can't they limit that with the special use like they did with Hillsdale? You know, they said function could have how X number of times per year and X number of people.
Right.
I'm hearing Carl suggest that we work some of those details in here.
I would prefer to see it now. You can always start with a minimum and say, or, you know, this is going to no more than 100 people at an event. And then you might say, you can have more, you can ask for more, and we may be able to give it to you if you show the following, whatever it is. You know, I don't know, more buffering. If you put, you know, instead of a 100-foot buffer, you've got a 200-foot buffer, or you're 500 feet away from the nearest residence, or 1,000. You know, you could build those in, but I think there should be a minimum standard that applies to everybody, and then you could work on things that would allow that number to go up on your discretion based upon known factors in the regulation. So it's not a subjective call.
Yep.
Like this location might be better than that location, so they're going to get more hours of operation and more capacity, just in a subjective way. I don't want you to feel your way around this. I want you to have some clear standards so that if I show A, B, and C, and D, I can go up to 150 people instead of 100 or whatever your max is.
But
So no one can question you as to, you know, well, how come this guy got, 7 o'clock at night and I only got 6? And you say, well, that was our discretionary call. It's always better if you had, well, no, we looked at the standards and he, that operation conformed to the 4 standards that allowed us to use our discretion to give them an extra hour or 50 more people or something like that.
But Carl, you're talking about, like, we're in the section for private events and function rooms, but what about, like, just outside on the hill where they're, like, sitting on the grass with their blanket, having a little picnic, having wine? We don't limit that. I mean, you limit the parking, whatever they have parking for, but that's not a private event. That's just tasting rooms open, enjoy our
Are you going to limit the capacity in the tasting room?
In the tasting room, yeah, but what if somebody buys a bottle of wine and they're just outside in the...
Well, you're not allowed. Are you allowed on-site consumption?
Well, that's a tasting room.
No,
Well,
but you're...
also-
I have an old version here, but my understanding is you can't buy a bottle of wine and open it there and drink it. Right?
Oh.
Isn't that what you got, or did you change that?
I don't know. I thought that's what, I've never been to a winery, so I don't know.
Well,
No,
in
you
Napa
could, at
Valley,
most vineyards, you can open a bottle of wine, but
one that
I think, Carl, in an earlier draft, I believe, had a limitation on on-site consumption. I don't believe this draft does. So I think the
Okay.
situation you described,
so
I
you're going
believe, my
to
recollection
have a
is
wine bar is what you're going to have. You have to understand that.
as Jill
And
says,
also
I
it's
could
gonna
buy a
turn
bottle of
into-
wine, I could buy my crackers, I could go outside on the lawn, put a blanket down, and enjoy the sunset. Yes.
So I have
Maybe-
seen in other regulations, though, having an area for consumption. You know, it's somewhat
Yeah.
of an odd model to allow someone to buy a bottle and then go outside, walk the grounds, and consume it
Well,
somewhere
it's
without
not
having
unusual.
a corral of some sort
Yeah.
that's somehow
Actually-
monitored.
All wineries allow you to do that.
You could
Just
ask
about.
I think they call it a curtilage area and say, look, you've got 200 square feet indoors in your wine tasting area, and we'll allow you 400 square feet or 500 square feet. But it's hard to manage. I mean, people are going to take their bottle in their plastic cup, and they're going to walk around, and then you're going to have people. They're going to come in and say, okay, can I have 20 picnic tables with umbrellas under there so people can drink their wine? So that's what I mean. That's how it grows. So in the summertime, no one's going to be inside. And the other thing you have to keep in mind is that a lot of these guys will hire food trucks to come and visit, all right? And there are a number of traveling food trucks that are very famous. One of the biggest ones is the Cousins Lobster. Anybody heard of that?
Yeah.
no.
Page is going yet.
They're from Shark Tank.
They'll get 500 people
Yeah.
to show up. They have a
Yeah.
website, and they'll go on Facebook, and they'll say, we're going to be in Summers at the Smith Winery, and 500 people will show up.
For a lobster,
Lobster roll.
From a lobster roll off a food truck, absolutely.
Well,
Oh my
again,
God.
I mean,
It's going to happen.
you could
wow.
make it a condition.
Asia Page will be in line. She's already smiling.
For that.
Anyway,
Make it a
So-
condition they can't have food
Thank
trucks.
you for bringing that up. I saw Glenn's question about generators. So I was at an event recently where they had food trucks running the loudest generators. Like you could barely even stand to be near it. It was kind of like, oh, well, we need a generator. But wouldn't that be an awful thing to have running? You know,
Well, I'd rather have a generator running than food poisoning from salmonella because they weren't running it at the lobster truck.
Eliminate food
well,
trucks.
let me say, so
No
at least
sushi
one
on
other
it.
town and maybe more have dealt with this by not allowing generators, and they make the operator put in power to the outside with a food truck and connect. Now, having said that, all right, I can tell you that it's not like a 220 plug and there's one universal
Yeah.
plug that
Yeah.
so you have to have maybe half a dozen different type of outlets so that each of these, and some of them won't be able to do that. All right, and again, this is if you've got a good operator who calls and says, well, what kind of outlet do you need to connect in? Because if you're running a generator that's on the front of your truck, right, you can't come here. But if the operator doesn't do that, and the guy shows up, no one's going to make him go home. Now, the other thing is, the newer food trucks, all right, some of these famous chefs in Connecticut, all right, under current conditions, and they have these state-of-the-art wagons, whatever. I mean, these are like, basically restaurants on wheels, and all that stuff is internal, and they're going to run their own generator because they're going to have no way to plug it into something. So, but I understand what Paige is saying. Yes, you get an old food truck, like the one that's out in front of the old movie house in Enfield. Was it Cinco de Mayo? Anybody been by there? When they're running their generator, it's pretty loud. Or the guys that are in front of the courthouse or on Elm Street, in front of Deep by Bushnell Park.
Oh, okay.
I think, I don't know, in my opinion, just my opinion, from a zoning perspective. If Carl Walton had changed or suggested the farm winery, and if it's a farm winery, I wouldn't. The atmosphere doesn't seem like it would be conducive to allow food trucks. The point would be to visit the farm,
That
taste the
becomes a whole
wine.
festival atmosphere.
I think I just think food trucks. I've seen it. I've driven past the one in South Windsor. We went there once but it's a brewery just to go get, I don't know, try their beer. And Cousins was there. And we didn't know that. And there was absolutely nowhere to park. Nowhere.
Right.
And this was like recently where
And
people.
it's not even that good.
It's expensive too. But I just think the atmosphere this is just my opinion from what all the commission members have been discussing. That sounds more like the winery and distillery, not the farm. Carl was specific to put in farm, winery, farm, brewery, farm, distillery.
Well, I can tell you right now that under the COVID orders,
Mm-hmm.
none of these places can be open unless they have a food truck there. Because bars are not permitted to be open.
Yeah.
So,
Well,
the-
I believe they can be open as a tasting place, but they cannot be open as a place for you to buy a bottle of wine and go outside and sit.
Nope.
Right.
that's correct.
I went
Yeah.
to one in Woodstock. I don't know if they had a generator or not. Maybe a month ago. And they had, it was all outdoors except for the window where you would get your wine to taste. They just had someone set up with a tent, a canopy, and a table. And they had, chafing dishes or whatever, and whatever it was, they just did simple little things like bruschetta and not food truck. Like I think the food truck, again, I don't think it's fitting with, and
Yeah, I
hopefully
tend to agree with
COVID
Jennifer.
won't be a factor forever.
So, right, but you're going to have to write that into your regulations. No food trucks allowed. If that's what you're.
I mean, that would be my suggestion under
If
farm
you don't put
winery.
it in there, someone's
Is
going
it
to say,
just
"Well, you
food
didn't."
trucks or outside vendors? I mean,
Whatever you want to do, I'm just saying you should make it
It
clear
can be
from the
whatever
start.
we think we need, what we need, Paige. I mean,
yeah.
I would
So it
just
seems
suggest
to me
no
that
food
there's-
trucks.
First of all, this feedback's been very helpful, but I think I've got some work to do on this to advance our discussion. So I think if you'll allow me to take this and get to the next evolution of this, we can move on to sort of some of the remaining parts in this. Does that sound like a plan?
Yeah.
yes.
Sure.
So I think,
Step away for a minute.
yep. So I think the next page to go to is actually, it's page 136, and it's just a couple of minor changes on section 710 regarding historic significance. And we're putting in the words earthwork operations here. That's our segue into section, I believe the next is 8.4, which is section, for a moment, page 159. Bless you. So I think the way this has been set up, again, we have a fairly comprehensive definition of earthwork. So, under 8.4b, these are the following things you can do with no zoning permit required. 1,000 cubic yards of less of earth material when associated with the development or activity for which site plan approval or special use permit has been issued by the commission. The amount of earthwork has been declared by the applicant and approved by the commission. So when somebody says to you they've done their math and it comes out to 900 cubic yards and you believe them, then you don't need a separate permit. If in fact you do your own math or they disclose that it's more than 1,000 cubic yards, then they're going to need a special permit from the commission in addition to a site plan or another special permit. Because at that point in time, I think we ran the numbers on this, that we think 1,000 cubic yards could be 50 truckloads of material. And that could have an impact on the neighbors. perhaps more than 50. Impact on the neighbors, impact on the streets, drainage, erosion, sediment control, runoff, etc. So it's a fairly strict standard, and it may increase the number of applications that one activity will bring before you. You might need to apply for site plan approval for this, and a special use permit for earthwork for something else. And our threshold is below 1,000, you're good to go. Above 1,000, you got to come and talk to us. The second part is earthwork involving 1,000 cubic yards or less where a zoning permit has been issued. This is where somebody's digging a foundation for a house or putting in a swimming pool, etc. The issue is 1,000 cubic yards that's a pretty good size area, a pretty good size amount of dirt. And again, their application would come in, I think, then on a zoning permit form or whatever. You would have just a little question like how many cubic yards of material or earthwork is going on. They'll tell you, and then you decide whether or not you can do it or you need to refer them to the commission. Landscaping of a lot is permitted. This gets to Lucas's question about people planting trees. Normal agricultural operations are exempt. Ponds for agricultural or conservation purposes, and earthwork associated with construction of a road in a subdivision approved by the planning commission. That's what's exempt. Everything else is going to come to the commission. So again, there would be an increase in activity before the commission. On the next page, we now get into anything is no longer allowed by site plan approval. And then with special permit, earthwork of more than 1,000 cubic yards, that's what we were just talking about. Secondly, is blasting or similar explosive dislocation of earth material. So at that point in time, or in the third choice is crushing or separating. So if you're going to do any of those things, you're coming to see the commission for a special permit. So I think the categorization here starts to get at some of the issues that, as I understood them, that concerned the commission. I look forward to your feedback.
Carl Walton, for the record. The only thing I've raised in that, Glenn, is that we were educated as to the use now of hydraulic means of splitting rocks, and we should probably include that as a method because, our qualifier here is the 1,000 cubic yards by any means.
Yep. What did they call it, Carl? Was it just hydraulic blank, or what was it?
They referred to it as fracking, but I don't know that it is technically fracking.
It's more hydraulic splitting of rock. Fracking, I think, implies you're taking of some type of gas from the earth, where they're just strictly splitting the rock without an explosive and then removing it, correct?
I think fracking, is a contraction of fracturing. So I think I'll try to figure out a way to get that in here. I agree with you.
On that same subject, something else that came up in our education about that process was the products used as part of that.
Yep.
There was a concern about it possibly being a petrochemical. So, I don't know if it's worth mentioning, any chemicals used must provide the, I think they're called MDA sheets.
MSDS, Material Safety Data Sheets.
There we go.
Sorry, that
something
was
that we're now trying to require sort of after the fact, but
they're using when you're drilling, you obviously need some lubricant on the drill.
Yeah.
You're drilling into rock, so they use a grease that in some cases can contain hydrocarbons and petrochemicals. So you want to eliminate those, right? Ban those.
Correct. I believe that was the recommendation that was made by our expert.
Right. So you might as well build it into the regulations, right?
Thank you. So I picked up the language in the DEP guidance document, which is referred to here on page 160, item 2D, and it has the URL here for that document. Does that include what you just mentioned, Carl, or is this in fact a separate?
That's not in there.
So that would be a separate report that maybe Jen could get you a copy
Right.
of that was done by a person we hired to check on the report given to us by an applicant.
Thank you,
Yeah,
Jim. Can you send me
I'm not
two
a-
things?
Yeah.
Can you send me that report? And secondly, can you send me the approval letter for Hillsdale so I can see the condition of approval that was placed on there with regard to hours and events?
Okay.
Both of those would be very helpful. Thank you.
Yep.
So I think there's not too much more that's going on in the earthwork section, but that is a structural change in terms of the way to approve this. I think as Carl indicated earlier, this may provide a situation where we're going to sort of clamp down on this a little bit. We may modify or reduce or release it later, but that's the threshold here, the 1,000 cubic yards. How do you feel about that?
I think that it reflects what we were doing prior. We always had sort of a owner's use of right measurement of 1,000 cubic yards, I believe, or maybe it was actually a little bit more than that.
So I think we can certainly go to public hearing with this and see what we get for comments and feedback from people. And there's no magic to this 1,000 cubic yards. I started thinking about it. It was a number that we had in, I think, some regulations we talked about earlier. And if a truck is 20 cubic yards, that's a good sized truck. Then that's 50 truckloads. And then I started doing some math and thinking about the size of a pool or the excavation for a pool or the excavation for a basement. For a large house, and even moving a driveway or overall construction. So I think hopefully people will weigh in and tell us whether or not 1,000 is a reasonable number or a crazy number, and we can take that under consideration. So it sounds like I need to add hydraulic fracturing in here, and then the information from Jen on data sheets and stuff like that. And then I think, just trying to look ahead here, I think that might take us. Yeah, is that close to the end? Hang on a second, bear with me. I think there is some stuff in the procedures section. Nothing much, just a couple of typos and other stuff like that. So I think those are the major questions or issues. So I think I have enough to do on the farm, winery, brewery, distillery to come back to you when I get the material from Jen. I think I'll go ahead and incorporate the earthwork discussion. In terms of the other material, summary of possible issues remaining, do we want to tackle those tonight or kick these over to our next meeting?
Our next meeting.
Fine. So just so that you know, the summary of possible issues remaining, I think there are 6 of them, just real quick. Definition of daytime hours. The comment from the planning board about they don't want to allow earth excavation in the A zone. Sunny's Place, Golf Center, the floor area and basement requirements, and again, that's the report from the Planning Commission, and then the question on drive-through windows. So I will make these changes to the regs, get them back to Jen, and then work with her to schedule another date for us to work these through. Your meeting date, when would your next meeting date be? Is it December 7th?
Yes.
So I think I might be able to get it to Jen a week in advance to give you time to review it before the meeting. So let's shoot for that. Well, actually, what's your agenda look like for December 7th?
Do you want to be on our regular meeting? Because I don't know what we have that night.
The
So
Eastman's
that's a regular
still.
meeting. I don't know how much time we're thinking.
You have the Eastman applications, the Haley Lane applications to discussion,
I only
decision.
thought for the convenience of the commission, if the commission says we've got an active meeting that night, I could work with Jen in terms of a doodle poll or a meeting date that following Monday night on the 14th, whatever the commission's preference would be. But if we're getting into the holidays at this point, so do you want me to work a doodle poll with Jen?
Do what?
A doodle poll. It's a way for us to weigh in on possible dates.
Yeah. Yes.
Okay. Great. I will get the material from Jen, make the updates, and then we'll work out a meeting date.
Glenn, can you add one thing that I noticed, and I
Certainly.
when they discuss removing the 1,500 foot separating distance for drive-throughs, I'm not sure if it was intentional or not, but I noticed that in the village business, drive-throughs are not allowed. I'm not
Right.
sure if that's what you wanted, so that means like right here at the.
I think we'd have to look
With-
at the map and talk about it as opposed
That's
to
why I just want to
looking-
add that to that drive-through topic. If you could expand that drive-through topic, because.
I can only, Carl Walton for the record, I can only add to the drive-through topic that was a request from someone at the public hearing. It wasn't a request or a consideration from us. We spent quite some time coming up with that regulation and had quite a bit of deliberation about why we felt 1,500 feet was appropriate. And it primarily ties back again to the sentiment that came through the Plan of Conservation and Development that no one wants it to look like parts of 190 in Enfield or Route 5 where there's McDonald's, Wendy's.
Right. My
Right.
question is,
Center of town.
when we created a village business district separate from commercial, was that the intention to not allow drive-throughs in the village area?
I can only tell you without seeing the map of the area that you're talking about, I can't answer that.
I don't remember. It was a year ago.
I'm just, yeah. I
And
mean,
we'd have to look
I just want
we'd have to look at that map
Right.
at the same time as the conversation for me
right,
to understand if I agree or disagree with what you're saying.
because basically when
The
you're
village district is the intersection of 190
correct,
and 83,
right,
then I would say we do not want to allow them there. But that's just me.
I mean, we
Well, let's
have,
do this.
I'm not the whole commission. I'm just me, and I'm going based on what feedback we got from the surveys that were done for the Plan of Conservation and
okay.
Development.
I just wanted to point that out and for the
Yeah.
commission to
'cause,
consider.
I mean, we have the drive-through at the Dunkin' Donuts, and that goes all the way around the back of the building and out onto 83.
I don't think that that's in the same district that Jen's talking
Yeah,
about.
would
though. I
that
think
would
that's
that's
outside of it.
I believe that would be village business once we change it. I
Like
tried to.
said, without seeing the maps that
Right.
were proposed, I don't have a vision of it. It's too long ago.
So here's what I'd like to do, if it's okay with the commission. I think there were two parts to that material, which says summary of changes made. I think the first couple of pages were through that, so I'm going to shorten it down to the issue of the possible issues remaining. I will add in what Jen just said, and then I'll take snapshots of the zoning map to focus in on those areas affected by the village business, and then we can talk about it at our next meeting and make sure that we come to a decision.
Right. Yeah. I just wanted to point that out.
Perfect.
Great.
Madam Chair, I have nothing else for you tonight.
Thank you, Glenn.
Thank you.
Been a pleasure. Glad to get back at this.
It's been a while.
Been long overdue.
Mm-hmm.
I actually think we made some really good progress here tonight too.
Yeah. I think a separate meeting just for this works well. I mean, we originally said it wasn't going to go longer than an hour.
I'm sorry, nobody told me that.
Well, I know, but I said that when we scheduled.
Oh, okay.
I think that was Paige that requested that.
That's me because I got
No, it was going to be a 1 hour meeting, I thought, but I did wait to have dinner, so.
So I was
Where did Lucas go?
Was there anything else? Shall we?
I guess he
Make a
assumed we were
motion?
done.
We make a motion to adjourn this meeting at 7:15.
I make a
So
motion.
moved.
Seconded.
Thank you. All in favor? Aye.
Aye.
Everybody have a good night.
You
Thanks,
too.
everybody.
Thanks,
Have a
guys.
Great Thanksgiving, everybody.
Okay.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.
Bye.